Every second and fourth Thursday of the month at noon, Mountain Time, we will be here with a new presentation. During this presentation, you may come up with questions. If you do, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to send in your question, as all of you are muted on this presentation. Your questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Before I introduce you to our speaker today, I just want to introduce myself. You're probably used to seeing Paula Nepper on here. Paula had a family emergency, so I am Christian Strayhorn. I am the education director, and I'm just filling in for her today. So don't worry, she'll be back. I'd like to introduce you now to today's presenter, Jenny Borrasso. Jenise, or Jenny Penny, as she is known, was born and raised in San Francisco, California. She was excited when her father, a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, introduced her to numismatics. Starting with the Lincoln cents, she developed a deep passion and love for coins. A current student of the ANA's Numismatic Diploma program, she is on the path to becoming a numismatic scholar. She enjoys sharing her interest in cents with friends, family, and strangers. Jenise will be presenting today on the Roosevelt Dime. It's all yours, Jenise.
Okay, so hello, nice to see everybody. Well, I know it's a one-way webinar. Like I said, my name is Jenise Borrasso, and I got involved with coins about 3.5, 4 years ago through my father. He'd been collecting for about 20 years. And one day he just gave me a bunch of coffee cans full of weed cents. So it took me a really long time to go through them, sort them by date and mint, and also just learning about them and learning about the history of coins. And it just became so interesting to me to have something tangible in my hand. So I'm more interested in coins for me personally to learn the history aspect. So I've done a Lincoln cent, the historical perspective of Lincoln cent. I have one about the Jefferson nickel that I'm preparing, and now we're doing the Roosevelt dime. The reason I'm doing these is because these are circulating coins that we still have nowadays, and it's as a new numismatic collector, I prefer to start with the ones that I can see physically in my hand on a daily basis. And so, without further ado, we shall get into the PowerPoint here about the Roosevelt dime. So when I do, let's see, share screen. The United States made the first dime in 1796, originally made as the draped bust, during a time period when there really wasn't any numismatic interest in saving coins. The original dimes were at a weight of 2.7 grams with a metal composition of 89.24% silver, 10.76% copper. And they were 19 millimeters diameter with a reeded edge. Now, the reeded edge is the thickness of the edge from the obverse to reverse, and it has lines running across it. The reason they did this is because they were made out of silver, so people would shave the edges of the coin and sell the silver, but still have the coin what it's worth at face value. So they decided to make a lot of the coins with reeded edges so that you could tell right away if somebody had shaved the silver off the side. In 1809, the capped bust dime was introduced, and the weight was decreased to 2.41 grams, also with a reeded edge. After 1837, and starting with the Liberty seated dime, the silver was increased to 90% silver, 10% copper, and the diameter was changed to 17.9 millimeters, and the weight was 2.67 grams. In 1853, as a response to rising silver prices, the dime's weight was reduced to 2.49 grams. And in 1873, brought about by the Mint Act of 1873, the dime's weight was increased to 2.5 grams, which is what they weighed when the 1946 Roosevelt dime came out, also with a reeded edge. And this was done in an attempt to make U.S. coinage the currency of the world. So the Mint added a small amount of mass to the dime, the quarter, and the half dollar to bring their weights in alignment with fractions of the franc piece, which we see down in the bottom corner here. It's interesting to note that the change also ensured that the quarter, which was valued at 2.5 times the dime, 6.25 grams, and the half dollar valued at 2 times the quarter, weighing 12.5 grams. In this way, the specific weight of these coins, no matter what the mixture of denominations, would always be worth the same. And this is when the coins were actually based on the weight of the precious metal. As we know today, we don't have coins based on precious metal weight anymore. During the early to mid 1940s, the United States was battling the Great Depression and World War II. At the time, the nation was being led by our 32nd president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Roosevelt passed away at the age of 63 on April 12, 1945, near the end of World War II, and the newly termed president, President Truman, wanted to commemorate FDR on the dime as soon as possible due to his close ties with the March of Dimes. Roosevelt had previously graduated from Columbia Law School, holding various political positions, such as New York State Senator from 1911 to 1913. He was the Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Navy from 1913 to 1919. And at the age of 38, he decided to run for vice president with Democratic nominee Governor James Cox of Ohio in 1920. Thus, he resigned his position as the Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Navy in order to campaign across the nation. Republicans Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge defeated the Cox-Roosevelt ticket in the presidential election by a wide margin, and Roosevelt did accept the loss. After the election, he returned to New York City, where he practiced law and served as vice president of the Fidelity and Deposit Company, which was surety bonds and burglary insurance. In the bottom picture down here, this is his office in New York from 1921 to 1927. Roosevelt was seeking a political comeback in the 1922 elections, but his career was derailed by illness. His main symptoms were fever, ascending paralysis, facial paralysis, bowel and bladder dysfunction, numbness, and a descending pattern of recovery, and was left permanently paralyzed from the waist down and was diagnosed with polio at the age of 39. So here's him up here in a wheelchair since he's paralyzed. Not one to let anybody stop him, he used his political skills to develop a rehab center in Warm Springs, Georgia for other polio victims. So Roosevelt had gone here. It used to be called the Warm Springs Inn, and they had mineral-rich waters. And when he came here, he felt that he was feeling a lot better and a lot healthier, so he decided to buy it. He bought Warm Springs Inn, and he turned it into the Roosevelt Warm Springs Institute for Rehabilitation, or RWS. And it was founded in 1927 as a polio rehab facility where patients could heal together in the warm and mineral-rich springs. On November 6, 1928, Roosevelt was elected governor of New York by popular vote and was reelected to a second term in 1930. And so here in the left corner, we have a picture of one of his reelection posters. In November 1932, he won the election in the U.S. presidency, and he went to win re-election for 3 more terms. In fact, FDR was the longest-running president at almost 13 years due to the fact that there were no term limits at that time. They ratified the 22nd Amendment shortly on February 21st, 1951 afterwards, which put a 2-term limit on the presidents. In 1937, Roosevelt and his former law partner, Hazel Honor, turned Warm Springs into a not-for-profit foundation called the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, or NFIP. They used Roosevelt's name and prestige political position for multiple fundraising efforts, including the nationwide President's Ball. So they had a ball every year on his birthday, January 30th, starting in 1934, where they would do some fundraising. To promote additional fundraising, Eddie Cantor, the popular star of vaudeville, films, and radio, suggested a new type of appeal, which he termed the March of Dimes. And the name was a wordplay on the contemporary newsreel series, The March of Time, which was an American newsreel series sponsored by Time Incorporated and shown in movie theaters. It was the radio news series broadcast from 1931 to 1945. So he inspired nationwide fundraising campaign in the week preceding the birthday ball. Pins, like on this bottom picture here, were sold for 10 cents each or a dime, And special features were produced by the motion picture studios and radio industry, and nightclubs and cabarets held dances and contributed a portion to the proceeds. Cantor himself stated, and I quote, "The March of Dimes will enable all persons, even the children, to show our president that they are with him in this battle against this disease. Nearly everyone can send in a dime or several dimes. However, it only takes 10 dimes to make $1. And if 1,000,000 people send only 1 dime, the total will be $100,000. Cantor's appeal collected only a few dimes, and donations to begin with, just $17.50, had been sent to the White House in 2 days. But what followed was a flood. By January 29th, over 80,000 letters and dimes, quarters, and dollars poured into the White House. Official correspondence to the president was buried in donation letters, with a final count of 2,680,000 dimes, or $268,000. It was donated in what the press called a silver tide, which actually swamped the White House. Roosevelt actually went on the air to express his thanks right before his birthday celebration broadcast. And I quote, said, "During the past few days, bags of mail have been coming, literally by the truckload, to the White House. Yesterday, between 40 and 50,000 letters came to the mailroom of the White House. Today, an even greater number. How many, I cannot tell you, for we can only estimate the actual count by counting the mail bags. All the envelopes are dimes and quarters and even dollar bills, gifts from grown-ups and children, mostly from children who want to help other children get well. It is glorious to have one's birthday associated with work like this." And that was January 30th, 1938. Through the popular media of the day, which were radio, posters, broadsides, which are flyers as we call them now, film shorts, the country's most popular entertainers backed the campaign to send their dimes directly to the White House in Washington. Postcards like this one here on the right side, showing a well-dressed child with polio accompanied by a card or folder in which one could insert as many as 10 dimes and also a spot for dollar bills. A dime in the 1930s was worth about $1.27 in today's money. So the March of Dimes proved to be its weight in silver. The 1938 campaign alone was a huge success, and they ended up raising $1,800,000. Anderson was the very first poster child for the March of Dimes. He was from Oregon and had been diagnosed with polio in 1914. Photos were taken of Donald in an almost paralyzed state, as you can see up in the left-hand corner. Right. And then another photo was taken, the second photo here where he's walking, was taken 7 months later to show how he had improved after receiving treatments by the foundation. This story was meant to show how regular everyday Americans had helped Donald during his time at the polio ward by donating to the March of Dimes. The March of Dimes was the title used for the foundation's annual fundraising event that requested each child to donate a dime. At the Christmas season, booths were set up in cities where the children could drop a dime in a slot. These were out on the street and sometimes not even overseen by anybody. Gradually, the name became synonymous with that of the organization. Nowadays, it promotes a general health of women and babies. And because Roosevelt was actively involved in the March of Dimes, it only seemed appropriate that the U.S. dime be used to commemorate Franklin Roosevelt. This is why his face was used on the dime. Mid-April 1945, FDR went back to his cottage in Warm Springs for a few weeks. People at Warm Springs loved him and always greeted him with his nickname that they had dubbed him, Rosie. This is what he was called by his fellow polios, as he called them, when he would flee Washington and visit. The picture on the left shows FDR going through mail in the living room of his cottage in Warm Springs, and it was in this chair and at this card table only a few short days later, on April 12th, 1945, at 3:45 p.m. in the afternoon, that he suffered a fatal cerebral hemorrhage and died. The image on the right is the final resting place of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, as it looks today. In 1945, President Truman succeeded FDR and wanted to commemorate him by redesigning the Mercury dime to show an obverse of a portrait of Franklin Roosevelt. The Mint director at the time, Nellie Taylor Ross, pushed hard to give John Sinnock the opportunity to design the Roosevelt dime in 1945 and 1946. He was the 8th chief engraver at the U.S. Mint. Nellie Ross was the first woman, actually, appointed Mint director and is the longest-term Mint director, serving 20 years. Ross was also the 14th governor of Wyoming from 1925 to 1927, and the director of the Mint from 1933 to 1953. She was the first woman to be elected governor of any U.S. state, and is still the only woman to have served as governor of Wyoming, taking over for her husband through a special election passed away during his term as governor. John Sinnock was born on July 8, 1888 in Raton, New Mexico. Growing up, he was very interested in art and engraving, eventually moving to Pennsylvania and attended the Philadelphia Museum School of Industrial Art, studying artistic methods and designs. The school is modernly known as the University of the Arts and College of Art and Design. He's since designed and engraved many medals and portraits while attending another art institution, the Pennsylvania Academy. Some of the portraits and medal include famous people such as President Herbert Hoover medal down here, the inventor Thomas Edison medal here in the middle, and the writer Charles Dickens medal here on the right side. Sinnock applied for an open position as assistant Mint director and was quickly hired by the Mint's chief engraver at the time, George T. Morgan, in 1923, who was most famous for the Morgan dollar design. One of Sinnock's first work designing the Mint was a project, George Morgan. Sinnock designed the reverse on the right side here, and Morgan designed the obverse of the commemorative 1918 Illinois Centennial half dollar, which depicted President Abraham Lincoln. Unfortunately, George Morgan passed away, and Sinnock became the 8th chief engraver of the Mint in 1925. A few years later, Sinnock was involved in the creation of the redesign of the Purple Heart Military Medal, which is a prestigious award that would be given to those who were wounded or killed while serving in the military. Elizabeth Will, the right side middle here, was in charge of the redesign, and she takes the credit for the design of the Purple Heart Medal, and John Sinnock takes credit for making refinements and the modeling of the medal. The new Purple Heart Medal was first awarded February 22nd, 1932 on the bicentennial of Washington's birth, which today is February 22nd. So a little bit of history for today. The first redesigned Purple Heart Medal was given out. Nellie Ross chose John Sinnock to design the new dime since he had already produced a Franklin Roosevelt first term medal. Now, this particular version of the medal in the top left corner was only struck for a short period of time before being replaced with a new medal for a second term. The front shows a bust of FDR with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States of America, around the edge. Based on this medal, he produced what's now known as the Roosevelt Dime. The front of the dime depicts Roosevelt facing left, and the reverse depicts a flaming torch symbolizing liberty, with an olive branch symbolizing peace and an oak branch symbolizing victory. The top right sketch here is Sinnock's original design. However, he was asked to make changes, and the bottom image is the design we use today. So the differences being, if you look at the top design, the torch flame go out pretty far to the right. In the bottom design, the flames are a little less, but in the design we use today, they just kind of go up. That's one of the main changes. The olive and oak branches, as you can see in the top, they're not as detailed as they are in the bottom. So a little more detailed. The hand that's holding them all is not complete on the bottom. And the one dime on the left side is now on the bottom here that says one dime, and the E pluribus unum, instead of squished on one corner, now stretches across the dime. So that's what it looks like today. On January 30th, 1946, the Roosevelt Dime is released to the public on what would have been Franklin Roosevelt's 64th birthday. Some at the time of the design and since have seen similarities between the dime and a plaque depicting Roosevelt sculpted by African-American sculptor Selma Burke. This was unveiled in 1945. Burke was among those alleging her work was used by Sinnock to create the dime. She advocated for this position until her death in 1994 and persuaded a number of numismatists and politicians, including Roosevelt's own son, James. However, Robert Van Ryzen, in his book on mysteries about U.S. coins, pointed out that Sinnock had sketched Roosevelt from life in 1933 for his first presidential medal. A 1956 obituary in the New York Times credits Marcel Sternberger with taking the photograph that Sinnock adapted for the dime. According to Van Ryzen, the passage of time has made it impossible to verify or invalidate Burke's certainty. We'll never know. The time the dimes were released, relations with the USSR were deteriorating, and Sinnock's initials, JS, were deemed by some to refer to Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, placed there by a communist sympathizer. Once these rumors reached Congress, the Mint sent out a press release, as you see here on the left, to debunk this myth. Despite the Mint's denial, there were rumors into the 1950s even that there had been a secret deal at the Yalta Conference to honor Stalin on a US coin. So I'm going to read here, quote unquote, what the Mint director said. From Washington, February 28th, Mrs. Nellie Taylor Ross, director of the United States Mint, today said a rumor that a communist agent placed Joseph Stalin's initials on the Roosevelt dimes is too silly for words. Also, utterly absurd. Mrs. Ross said, is a report that the Treasury will call in the Roosevelt dimes because of the minute initials JS that appear just below Mr. Roosevelt's head on the face of the coins. The Treasury knows the initials are on the coin. It authorized them. They are the initials of John Sinnock, official sculptor of the Mint, who designed the coin. He died 2 years ago, about the time the new dimes were put into circulation. No American with a grain of gray matter would think this government would place the initials of a foreigner on our coins, Mrs. Ross said emphatically. Mr. Sinnock was a wonderful sculptor. He had a great reputation as a metalwork specialist. His initials will always be there. Like any other artist, he signed work. No one ever thought of calling in the dimes or taking off the initials. Mrs. Ross heard that the rumors were started facetiously and passed along by some feeble-minded person. So interesting press release there from the Mint director. Have you ever heard of dimes graded as full torch or full band? The difference between full torch and full bands. So in 2003, the grading firm PCGS began attributing full bands designation for Roosevelt dimes. The PCGS requires both the upper and lower pair of bands on the torch appear distinct and in full separation. And this refers to the horizontal bands on the torch. So you can see that there's more distinction on the right side here than on the left. You can't see on the bottom. They only grade the coins with the FB or full bands designation at a Mint State 60 or higher. The competing grade service, NCG, began using their own version a few weeks later in 2003. In addition to the requirements that the upper and lower bands show full separation, they also require that the vertical lines of the torch be well defined. And they term theirs FT or full torch. So dimes that are professionally graded by either of these services, and they're graded either FT or FB for full torch or full bands, are valued at a higher premium to dimes without it. With the passage of the Coinage Act in 1965, which completely eliminated the silver content in the dime and the quarter, in order to lessen the cost of producing circulating coins, the Mint made a shift. The composition of the dime changed from 90% silver and 10% copper to a clad sandwich of 100% of the inner core being copper between two layers of an alloy of copper and nickel on either side. This composition was chosen because it gave a similar mass, which is now 2.27 grams instead of the 2.5 grams, and electrical properties, which were important in the vending machines at the time, but most importantly, because it contained no precious metal. The mint mark location also changed on the dime. From 1946 to 1964, the mint mark was on the reverse of the coin on the left bottom side of the torch. Right here, you can see the D. From 1968 to the present, the mint mark is above the date on the top. Yes, skip some years. That's because from 1965, 1966, and 1967, there were no mint marks on the dimes. The nation was in a coin shortage, and mint marks were left off coins to discourage collectors from keeping the coins and taking them out of circulation. The D and S for Denver and San Francisco mints, the dimes returned in 1968. Not the Philadelphia mint mark, though, because the P for Philadelphia wasn't actually added to coins until the 1979 Susan B. Anthony dollar. Technically, that's not correct because the 1942 to 1945 Jefferson war nickels had a large P for Philadelphia on the reverse at the top. Just those 3 years, though. And in 1946, the Jefferson nickels resumed the no P for the Philadelphia on the coin all the way up until 1980, which is when the rest of the coins started having the P mint mark to distinguish between the Philadelphia mint. Roosevelt dimes accidentally without mint marks are worth a lot more. So we're going to begin with this about the 1968 no S proof dime. This became the first proof lacking a mint mark during an era of proof coinage production at the San Francisco Mint. So the San Francisco Mint now produces proof coins, and they always put an S on their coins, sometimes they'll produce proofs at the West Point. It just depends if they're doing commemorative coins or something special, but typically San Francisco Mint is the one that produces the proofs. So there's always going to be an S. So to find a proof dime with no S, interesting. Examples are rare, and this 1968 no S proof dime, they've only graded about a dozen of them, and half a dozen with cameo proofs. And cameo is the amount of contrast between the relief or the raised design and the background. So prices start at about $20,000 for a proof in 67, a 67 grade, proof 67, and a proof 68 grade cameo are getting closer to about $35,000. And that's in the rare occasion that these come up to auction. Like I said, they've only found a dozen, the regular proofs, and a half a dozen, so only 18 so far. Still can't hurt to look. The next mint mark, no mint mark proof dime was just a couple years later in 1970. Hundreds of these are believed to exist, with examples of a proof 68 grade going for about $700, and those with like a proof 69 cameo are about $3,600 right now. Of similar scarceness is the proof 1983 no S, which is worth about $650 in a proof 68 cameo or $6,000 in a proof 70 cameo. And those are the 1983s. The proof 1975 no S Roosevelt dime is one of the greatest rarities of the modern era, with just two, that's right, only two known specimens and a six-figure price. One of the most interesting things about this particular coin is that it was first discovered in 1977, and just one other confirmed example have been found since. In fact, the rare proof 1975 no S Roosevelt dime is one of the rarest and most valuable coins struck in the last 50 years. While both coins have traded in private sales, its first public offering came only in 2011. And the coin graded a proof 68. It was sold for $349,000, $349,600, okay, in a Stack's Bowers Galleries auction. The next public transaction came in 2019 at a Heritage Auctions event, and the same coin sold this time for $456,000. This $500,000 coin has many wondering if a third example is floating out there somewhere in a long forgotten 1975 proof set. So get out your proof sets and start looking. If there's no S on there, And that brings us to the no mint mark 1982 dime. This is the most common and affordable missing mint mark Roosevelt dimes because it is a circulation strike. All of the other ones have been proofs. This is lacking its P mint mark. But remember, after the 1979 Susan B. Anthony, all coins from the Philadelphia Mint carried a P mint mark. So that means that every dime since 1980 should have some sort of mint mark on it. It's the only circulation strike Roosevelt dime missing its intended mint mark. And they were most likely made in very large numbers, as several thousand have turned up in months immediately following the production. Many were distributed at the Cedar Point Amusement Park in Sandusky, Ohio. Others turned up in Toledo and a little further away in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A few others were found in Boston, but they were all traced back to the Cleveland Federal Reserve Branch facility. Two variants are known for these dimes. There's a weak strike and a strong strike. The strong strike sells for about $250 in Mint State 65 grade, while the weaker strike is worth about half as much in the same grade. And last but not least, in our historical dime presentation, we have the March of Dimes commemorative $1 silver coin. March of Dimes Commemorative Coin Act of 2012 issued 500,000 $1 silver coins. And this was done to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the founding of the March of Dimes. The coins were to be uncirculated and issued to collectors for only 1 year, beginning January 1st, 2015. The coins carry a $10 surcharge that was to be donated to the March of Dimes Foundation to help finance research, education, and services aimed at improving the health of women, infants, and children. However, the Coin Act does stipulate that the minting and issuing of the coin, which it considered legal tender, would not result in any net costs at all to the federal government, and that no funds or for surcharges could actually be distributed to the March of Dimes until the total cost of designing and issuing the coins was recovered by the Treasury. Something interesting to note about this is there actually was the Commemorative Coin Act of 2011, and everything was the same except for it didn't stipulate that it said that dimes would get their surcharge right away. So they changed that, waited another year to distribute the coins, and made sure that the mint got all their money back for production and design costs before they gave the March of Dimes their $10 per coin, which at 500,000 coins, $5 million to the March of Dimes. So that is the end of our presentation. There haven't been very many design changes to the Roosevelt dime, so it's mostly history.
Thank you so much, Jenise. We have a few questions, so we're going to jump into that section next, okay?
Sure.
The first question is, why was the location of the mint mark changed?
I didn't find out about that, actually. I didn't see anything that had told me that. So good question. I'm actually going to write that down and look that up. Yeah. Why did they change it?
The second question is, how can you tell the difference between a no S dime and a Philly?
The proof sets. They don't have proof sets from Philadelphia. All the proof sets come out of San Francisco or sometimes West Point. So if it's a circulated, so that was the difference, is that if it's a circulated and it doesn't have a D on it, I found proofs in circulation, but they were proofs. I mean, just because someone breaks them out of a proof set and wants to use them, you can still find them, but you can tell the difference between a proof coin and, a circulating coin. So anything after 1980, it either has a D or an S or a P on it. And so if it doesn't have one of those, they assume it's from the Philadelphia.
Okay. Our next person just says nice presentation. So congratulations on that.
And instructions.
And then the last question for right now is, the 1996 WMM was not mentioned. Do you have any comment on that? Jenise, can you hear me? We may have lost her.
Hello?
Hey, there you are. Can you hear me?
Okay, you can hear me? Okay, yes, I can hear you.
All right. The
Yeah.
question or the statement was the 1996 WMM was not mentioned. Do you have any insight into that?
No, because this is more of a historical presentation. I did mention the missing mint marks because there are a few of them. There was just a fair amount, that were very specific to the proofs, except for the one circulating one. The presentation I do, we don't really get into like dye errors or varieties, or there's a lot of different things you can look up for dimes and different mints and special ones. But I was just trying to go a little bit through the history and then touch on the no mint marks. So
Okay.
like I said, I've done the scent, and I'm having a webinar as well. They're all historically based, and I've been talking with Paula about making like a part 2 where we can, for me, it's like once you figure out the historical significance, then I can dive in there and start looking at each year individually. And so we were thinking about making a part 2, and so maybe next year I might do part 2s for all of the circulating coins, because I know a lot of people want to know, which ones are rare and which errors, and it makes it a lot more fun. But like I said, me being newer to numismatics, I tend to focus on how the coin came to be in the first place, and then we can go on and find all the cool about each one in each year.
Yeah, I think that sounds fantastic, and I think many of our viewers and members would really appreciate that information in the coming years. So we appreciate you being willing to do that with us. Let me see if there are no other questions. I'm going to wait about a minute and see if any other questions pop up, and then we'll say our goodbyes.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I'm very excited for all of the online education to start. I was on your webinar a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
here we go.
We're so excited. April 29th, for those of you in the room, is the big launch of the e-learning academy. So we're super excited to be offering everything to our members. So be on the lookout, April 29th. And we had 2 questions pop up. Oh, we had a thank you. Someone said thank you. And then someone asked, PCGS says the 1996 W Roosevelt dime is the first United States dime which contained a W mint mark. These coins were produced at the West Point Mint to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Roosevelt Dime series. The coins were also only sold as part of the special 11 coin mint set, which were also released in 1996. Surprisingly, the 1996 W Roosevelt Dimes mintage is even lower than the silver dimes from 1946 to 1964. So that may provide some more insight into that last question that was out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with the WM. Yeah, thank you for that. Absolutely.
And then
they did a W for a quarter too, for the Washington quarter. I actually found one with the W, and I went online and I wanted to see if it really would sell, and I ended up selling it on, I think it was Etsy, for like $35.
Wow.
So,
You never know, right?
I was at like with my grandkids. I was at we put the fun games or whatever, like shooting the hoops and stuff. So you put in, you get the quarters. And so I found it right in there, like a change machine. So they're out there, it's just, the more start looking down, and you never know.
You could have that treasure in your hand.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, speaking of like the proof set, my sister was born in 1982, and my dad, he had a whole box of proof sets that he got, and he kind of pulled out 3 in the middle and said, here you go, have a couple of proof sets, they're not worth that much. Well, it was there's 2 versions of the 1982 proof set, type 1 and type 2, and type 2 is worth like $600. And sure enough, the one he gave me, he didn't even know. And I looked at it and I thought, oh my God, I said, Dad, did you know you gave me a type 2? What do you mean I gave you type 2? I didn't know that. And so yep. I had it evaluated, and sure enough, it was a type 2. And so I gave it to my sister for her birthday.
Oh, that was very thoughtful of you. Very thoughtful.
They're out there. You don't even know if you have them unless you look. So,
but you also had to let her know the value, right? Like
I did. It was hard. I wanted to keep it, but I was like, oh, but I wasn't born in 82, and I knew it'd be a good present.
Right. I could see giving my brother something like that and him being like, oh, cool, and throwing it in a pile, like, no, it has value.
Exactly.
But anyway, someone else said, outstanding. Very interesting presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great presentation. I have been collecting for over 50 years, but still learned some new info today. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. That is the goal.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yes.
absolutely. Education and spreading the information to people who wish to
Absolutely.
collect.
Information dissemination. That's what I love to do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to Jenise for a great presentation. Our NumismaTalks are being recorded and will be available to our members on our new e-learning academy at the end of April. Again,
Ooh.
April 29th. Be on the lookout.
Yes.
Please be sure to check for future programs on our website at money.org under the events and learning tab, and then NumismaTalks. Thank everyone again, and I hope you have a great afternoon.